Want to predict the next 2 years of property price growth?
Yeah, baby. Yeah.
This is how I'm assessing and risk management of my deals.
Rob Flux, property developer and head of the Property Development Network, unpacks part of the framework he uses to select areas with high growth potential in the next 2 years.
There's two indicators. If both of them are going upwards, the market is confident. If both of them are going downwards, that means that the market is concerned. It's where they crisscross that's interesting.
And how you can potentially use as a property investor to find some serious capital growth.
I'm going to use to predict the future, wait 6 months, and then look at the market indicator to see if I was right.
I like that.
We've got no supply, we've got huge demand from the population side, so there's a mismatch.
You're predicting like some serious growth ahead.
Yeah. The thing that most people don't realise is by combining all of these together is...
If you're a fan of hot spotting and potentially making some serious capital growth, you're going to enjoy this episode. My name's Todd Sloan. This is the Pizza and Property Podcast, and this episode is powered by InvestorKit, PDN, and Property Strats. More about our awesome show sponsors in the show notes below. But right now, let's jump into the episode with Rob Flux. Predicting 2 years of growth. Rob Flux, this is going to be a good episode.
I'm hoping so, mate.
There's a lot of people out there that are looking at 5 areas, 10 areas, like possibly even more. And it's about finding which one is actually potentially going to be the best pick of the bunch. Whilst there's no hard and fast 100%, there's definitely formulas that can be used and sort of strategies that can be followed to really hone in on what is possibly the best pick.
This is my crystal ball, mate.
For anyone on iTunes or Spotify, you might jump over to YouTube there. But now you're going to open up a few different things for us. We're going to be going through a bit of your formula. Is that right?
Correct. So this is how I'm assessing and risk management of my deals.
And indicators versus drivers. I thought this was an interesting one. Stick around for the formula of how Rob's actually assessing a lot of these, because these are some steps that you'll actually be able to follow along with at home to really help yourself understand an area that might be a better fit. But before we get into that, I think the indicators versus drivers and unpacking the difference is a real key element to this.
Absolutely. So firstly, an indicator is what most of your listeners are probably used to. It's what most property investors use. Mm-hmm. It's using things that have already happened. So things like days on market, auction clearance rates, median house prices. Mm-hmm. So it's a measure of things that have already happened. The challenge with an indicator is the fact that it actually measures market sentiment from anywhere between 4 and 6 months ago. Okay. So somebody had to think that they wanted to sell, then they had to go and engage a whole bunch of agents, then which agent is going to be the one, then put a marketing, get the house ready for property, do a marketing campaign, put it on the market, wait a few weeks for some home opens, then sign a contract, then wait for settlement. So a decision of market sentiment 4 or 5 months ago now measures as a sale today.
And is this when people are referring to data lag?
Correct. So there's a whole bunch of that indicators that kind of fit into that. So there's stock levels and I guess rental levels and all sorts of things like that. That all go into it. So stock turnover, so your days on market, auction clearance rates, vendor discounts, that sort of thing. Your market sentiment, your consumer sentiment, you've got your business sentiment. You've got stock availability, which is your listing volumes and your sale volumes, those sorts of things. They're all indicators, all measuring the past.
Gotcha. Okay. And so you're saying that this is something that is good to look into but not to rely on for the future? Or are you saying like you're not even looking at this at all?
Well, if you listen to any financial planner, they're going to tell you that past performance is no indication of future performance. If you follow trend lines, it's a good indication, hence indicator, of where things are going to go. But there's no guarantee, there's no certainty. And I'll say there's no guarantee or certainty in anything in life, including the stuff that I'm going to talk about drivers, but it's giving you a very, very good, strong gut instinct as to where things are actually going to go.
Well, I think like you just said at the very start, it's happened versus happening. So if you're going to really look at where things are going, looking at what's happened there's absolutely some merit to it, but looking at what's happening really has a lot more merit.
Absolutely.
Got it. Okay.
Now, for anyone who uses stock, I guess the market indicators, there's 2 indicators that are a really good litmus test of where the market's currently at right now. So listing volumes and sale volumes. Now I'm going to give some credit to, a property commentator, John Lindemann. He's done a great blog post on how to actually read these a little bit better. He's got a thing on there which I think is timing the turning point, so understanding when the market is starting to turn. And what he looks at is both sales volumes and listing volumes at the same time. So if both of them are going in the upwards direction, that's telling you that the market is confident.
Got it.
If both of them are going in the downwards direction, that means that the market is concerned. It's where they crisscross that starts to become really interesting. So if you can imagine a situation where the listings are going up, so lots of people putting things on the market, but the sales are going down.
That's not good.
That's not good. That's an indication that we're in a crashing market.
Yep.
Okay. If it's the other way around, if the sales are turning over super fast and turning over super quick, but there's no listings going on, everyone's holding on to their stock because they're riding the market because it's starting to boom. So they're wanting to wait until they want to sell it a little bit later on.
So if we're looking at where we're going next, we're trying to hone in on 5, 10 areas, whatever it is, to actually understand this better. What's our first step? What are we doing?
Understanding market drivers. The drivers are the things that are going to give us a view of what other things are actually happening in the market to encourage people to want to get into the market. That's probably the best way to start to look at it. Now, there are 16 different drivers that I look at that come into 4 different categories. Now, it's what's causing the market to move. Now, when we understand the 4 different categories, you'll understand why they start to play out. But by using that, we can go, if I can see where the market is in 2 years' time, I use it in my property development world because I want to go, well, I'm running a project that's going to take 2 years. I want to know, am I selling into an upward market? Am I selling into a downward market? So it's giving me a stress test for me. But from an investor point of view, it's also going to give an indication of, I guess,
Where the market's going.
Potential capital growth in that particular area.
Got it. Okay.
Now, the challenge is it's a black art.
What do you mean it's a black art?
Exactly that. Like I have a cauldron and some smoke and I have a hocus pocus.
Okay.
And I don't mean that in a negative way. There's not an actual score that you can go to one place and get. You've got to do a lot of research to find this information.
Yeah.
But when you do the information, I've developed a very simple scoring methodology that's given me a very accurate measure with how to actually do that.
Okay, so what you're saying is getting the info is a little bit of legwork, but once you've got the info, then there's a filter to put it through.
Correct.
Okay, but there's no, you don't just get onto CoreLogic or whatever and just go click.
Correct.
Right.
And most of the property commentators out there are reluctant to say where the market is going for fear of, with the exception of Harry Dent. He's always telling us it's going to crash.
Yeah, he likes that.
But the 4 different categories, so we've got government incentives. So where is government spending billions and billions of dollars? Now, government knows that they've got to create jobs for people and they've got to create homes for people and that sort of thing. So they use government infrastructure projects to spend money in a region, which then creates jobs in the region. When they create jobs in the region, those people start spending money in that region. When they start spending money in that region, they then start to feed the local economy. Then the local economy can start, employing jobs as well. It's called trickle-down economics.
Got it.
You've probably heard that term before.
I have. And so this is number 1, out of the 4 categories.
Yeah, so major infrastructure projects or government incentives as a category, but major infrastructure is probably the biggest driver of all of that.
And now when you say major, if someone's maybe looking in a smaller town or somewhere that's like a Bendigo, population of a few 100,000, so it's not huge, but it's not like one horse, are those major projects, they're basically scaled to the size of the town?
Correct, but you've got federal government, state government and local government. Each one of those will have their own projects that they're actually starting to do. So you want to look at all 3 layers of government to see what they're actually trying to do. And if you've got an alignment of all 3 in that area, so if there's a major highway upgrade happening at the same time that there's a new hospital going in, which is the same time that the council's updating all the libraries and parks and that sort of thing, now you know that something's going on.
Got it. Okay. Because if you've got an area that nothing's going on, there's no government infrastructure, no government spending, it's okay, well, this is already a good, not indicator, a good driver or lack of driver.
Yeah, you just watch the tumbleweed roll through the streets.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so and I can already see what you're saying here is that you're not just going to one spot to get that data.
You've got to go to lots of spots.
But it's something that's accessible.
Correct.
Is there anything else in 1 before we get to number 2?
Absolutely. There's short-term government incentives. So, for example, the recent building bonus that came through was a short-term incentive that comes through. Quite often they'll do homeowners grants or stamp duty exemptions or things like that where it's a period of time, and it might be 6 months, it might be 12 months, because they're trying to encourage activity at that moment in time. So you're going to look at what are those government incentives at that moment.
Got it. Okay. So most of this for the first category. We're talking anything that's really government, whether it's a state, whether it's like federal, but it's all that spending that's coming in outside of the private market.
Correct. And in the infrastructure project, we're talking billions of dollars. The short-term incentives, it's quite often millions. So and quite often it can be regionalised as well. So we need to look at all the layers of that.
Got it. Okay. What's number 2?
Population growth. Now, population growth has a number of categories. So you've got births, deaths and marriages. Now, Australia is one of those places where we tend to create someone new as somebody falls off the perch. So there's not a lot of growth that happens traditionally in that space. There's intrastate migration, so people leaving the city and going to regional, or people leaving regional and coming into the city. Now, when COVID was happening, there was a lot of that happening. Yeah. So if I was looking for growth at that point of time, I would have been going regional is going to get some huge growth at that point in time. Now everybody's come back. Now we're back at a neutral.
I'm already starting to look at this then as like a formula. So you're looking at population more so in isolation, and using your COVID example there, going heaps of people are going there. But then if you couldn't see lots of government infrastructure, lots of spending, you're probably going to look at that and go, yeah, they might be going here for a while, but are they going to stick around?
It won't be long term, correct.
Got it.
Then there's interstate migration. So people leaving one state and going to another. Now at this moment in time, the hordes are leaving Victoria en masse. There's a whole bunch of people also leaving New South Wales because the housing affordability is becoming problematic in both of those locations, and Victoria is charging a hell of a lot in regards to taxes there.
Yeah, they love their tax, don't they?
If I'm looking at those two states in particular, it's a negative.
Got it. Okay.
Those people have to go somewhere. So when I look at those places, that's now positive. So most of the places they're going are Queensland, Adelaide to some extent, and Perth. And predominantly it's southeast Queensland and Perth that are winning that war, but Adelaide's getting a few kickers from it along the way. People
are coming here. When I walked outside the other day, I actually saw someone on the street. There's a couple of us here now.
3 or 4. You'll have electricity soon.
Okay, so intrastate migration and interstate migration.
Correct.
So you're talking about this now from more of a state-based level of people going, I'm not happy here, I'm going to move to Queensland, I'm going to move to Perth or wherever.
Well, and sell up here and use that money and redeploy it somewhere else.
Okay, so I know we're not going through where to get every data point, but where would you get that? Is it an ABS thing?
Yeah, correct.
Okay.
That one is ABS.
That one is ABS.
Yep.
Right.
There's a lot of other sources that pull it from ABS and then will, I guess, instead of it just being an Excel spreadsheet, they'll actually make pretty pictures out of it so you can digest the data a little bit better. But the ABS is the root source.
Got it. Okay. All right, what else is there around population growth for number 2?
By far the biggest one, international migration. Australia is a country of migrants. All of us are migrants in some way, shape or form at some point in time. So last year, we had 520,000 people come into Australia as international migrants. They all need somewhere to live.
So many people.
So many people. That's the biggest intake we've had. And we're predicting anywhere from 400 to 450,000 people per year for the next 5 years.
So 400 to 450,000
per year for the next 5 years.
So that is a ton of people. Okay. And building wise, it's already looking like the whole million homes by 2030 or whatever that the government's promised is not on schedule.
Well, that's the next part, which is supply and demand.
Right. So that's number 3?
That's number 3, supply and demand.
What a segue.
Amazing.
So number 3.
So there are multiple elements to supply and demand. So there's development approvals. That is the potential for stock to be created. So development approval doesn't mean it actually gets constructed. It just means the council will allow it to be constructed.
Okay, so it could be, not it is.
Yeah. So it's the potential for supply. It's actually the engineering level detail of the building. So it's the one step prior to the construction commencing. Now a construction commencement is then, I guess, it actually starting. So that's once the funding has actually come through.
Right. Okay. So if you're seeing a lot of building approvals, that should be looked upon as a very different light to seeing a lot of development approvals.
Correct.
Okay. Yep. Makes sense.
Now, the finance approvals are the ultimate measure of that. So is it finance approval for someone building a brand new home? Is it investor? Is it owner occupier? Is it a construction loan? Those sorts of things. there's one other one, which is the construction industry health. So is the construction industry itself in a good place? Now, that's one where that's up for contention, but because it went through a lot of pain through the COVID period.
Well, and I noticed you used the word went, not going to, like, it's so that this is starting to fix. Like
well, it's in a recovery phase, but it's going to take a while to fix. There's some systemic problems in the system. That's probably a whole slice in itself.
Right. Okay. So one question here, financial approvals. Again, I'm not going to get into the where questions with everything, but where would you find financial approvals?
So most of these are the Australian Bureau of Statistics.
So this is just on ABS?
For those particular ones. Now, the challenge with the ABS is terminology. So what they call something and what the industry calls something is not the same something.
So they don't call it financial approvals?
Well, no, the finance side, yes, they do.
Okay.
What a developer would call a development approval, the ABS call a building approval. Now, what a developer calls a building approval, they call a commencement. So when you understand the differences in terminology and you start to, I guess, interpret that, the ABS building approval is the potential for supply and the commencement is the building approval.
I'm really glad I asked that question. Otherwise, we had a whole lot of confused people on the ABS.
Absolutely. And then the last of the four categories, mate, is purchasing power. So it's great that we understand what our supply and demand is, but the ability for someone to actually afford to actually do this is the next biggest challenge. So there's a number of categories under here. Unemployment rates, that's not a good sign. Interest rates, that's going to impact your affordability. You've then got household income and consumption. You've also got inflation and what is called fiscal policy. So fiscal policy is broken up into two elements. So there's the RBA, the Reserve Bank, and then there's also APRA, the Australian Prudential Regulatory Authority. Now they look after...
Say that one 3 times fast.
APRA. The Australian Prudential Regulatory Authority. They look after, I guess, the rules that sit around the borrowing side of things. Now I want you to think of it as two different levers. One is a huge lever that impacts the entire economy. So that's the RBA. So they say interest rates and the entire economy moves. The problem is that within the entire economy, we've got agriculture, we've got manufacturing, we've got, I guess, construction, we've got a whole bunch of little micro economies. And so that's where APRA starts to come in and they say, well, for this particular, I guess, micro economy, we're going to make the rules easier or harder. So if we want to make lending easier, then we might change the ratio of, your borrowing capacity versus your serviceability. Right. So they have changed that in the past to make it harder to borrow for investment properties, and they've also made it easier. So they can fine tune and say, look, we only want to impact the housing industry and we don't want to impact agriculture, for example.
Gotcha. Because they're the ones that brought in like the 6 times DTI or whatever it is in like 2017 and all the APRA changes.
Just slow it down.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, but they only slowed down one industry.
So far what I'm piecing together is you're looking at all of these in isolation and you're basically going, are they a positive or are they a negative? Like, are they going to move things forward or backwards?
Correct. And so I call that a headwind or a tailwind. So if you imagine that you're walking down the street and the wind is blowing into your face, then it makes it hard to walk down the street. That is a headwind because it's blowing into your face.
Makes sense.
If the wind is behind your back, then it makes it really easy to walk down the street. That's a tailwind. So what we're going to do in each of those 16 categories, we're going to say, is this a headwind or tailwind in our local place? And when we start to look at those, we're going to give each one of those a score, and the score is on or off, basically. And then at the end of that, is it 16-0? Is it 8-all? Or is it 0-16? That's going to tell us which kind of direction we're starting to go.
This is simple, like not simple getting everything, like you've just said. Gathering all this information is a bit of legwork. Once you've got it, it's done. But once you've actually got it, going through the scoring system, like this is pretty straightforward. I was expecting some kind of a complex formula.
No, it's simple in concept. It's hard to execute.
Yeah. No, I love this, man. And so let's say someone gets like 16, halfway. Are you looking at that then and going, just keep looking until you get like a 16, a 15? Like where's the kind of line for Rob Flux to go, yes?
Well, I guess remember I'm looking at it from a property developer's lens and you're probably looking at it from an investor lens. So we're going to have a slightly different point of view. I'm running a project that's going to take 2 years to run. My finance approval is based on a concept where my valuer has said, what can I buy in today's market? And if I could materialize the finished stock today, what would it sell for today? He doesn't recognize that in 2 years' time is when I'm really selling it. So what I'm trying to do is to go, where do I think the market's going to be in 2 years' time? Do I think the market's on an upward trend or a downward trend? And that then gives me a risk rating in my project. So I'm using that to go, well, I've manufactured a development profit, but do I also get a market uplift? Or is there a risk that there's a downward slide in the market, in which case I might still make a development profit, but it won't be near as big as I thought it would be.
Okay, so anyone looking at this from a property investor's lens, would this be more useful simply on like a comparative? Like we said at the very start, you're trying to decide between 5 different areas. One's got a score of 15 and the other 4 have got a score of 6.
Correct. And it's really only giving you a level of accuracy for the next 2 years. And each 6 months I go back and reassess and redo the process and reassess everything and go, well, where is that market actually starting to go? And if you want to get super good at building your gut instincts on this, what you do is you combine the use of a market indicator and a market driver together. So I'm going to use the market driver to predict the future, and then I'm going to wait 6 months and then look at the market indicator to see if I was right.
I like that. Okay, so it's almost like a paper trading with the stock market.
Paper trading, correct. Yeah. And so if I do that often enough, then I get to hone my skills and go, was I right? Was I wrong? What did I do? So it takes time to get that, I guess, practice and repetition up. But once you have, you get a very good feel for the market.
Biggest thing that I'm hearing with this, and if you're listening or watching right now and you're kind of dabbling in it, this probably isn't going to be for you. But if you're listening or watching right now and you're like, no, this is really what I want to do, I'm committed to actually profiting in property, I can see this being a great way for people that are absolutely new at it to start to get their head around it. Again, it's a bit of work to put together, but there's some potential significant profits if you get it right.
Absolutely. And so in putting this all together, whilst there's 16, what you do is you tend to remember what happened 6 months ago. And so your homework the next 6 months is, well, I don't have to do as much. I know that this particular project was happening from a government infrastructure spend. Is it still happening? So the process of the first time is very hard, but afterwards it's just a maintenance type activity. When we look at all of that together, if I gave you some themes, so I'm not going to go into each of the 16 drivers individually, but if I gave you some themes from a government incentives perspective, we're spending billions of dollars on projects across the country at the moment. And when you see where those projects are going, and off the top of my head, there's the West Connects tunnels, there's I guess the Sydney metros, there's train expansions that have happened in Adelaide. There's a whole bunch of things that are happening all around the place. When you start to know that particular market, you go, right, I can see where the spend is actually going. Then you start to, and every single one of those projects will have its own website that actually tells you this is the budget, this is the spend, this is the project. It's a 5-year project. We're into year 2 of that, and they give you an update on that the whole way. The government is really good at telling you what's happening, but we're too lazy to go looking.
But if you're willing to put in the effort, you're greatly increasing your chances of getting the result.
Correct. From an incentives perspective, there's lots of dollars happening there. And from a government incentives perspective, each state government is doing different things in order to encourage, the housing shortage by creating incentives in a combination of stamp duty incentives and first home buyer grants and that sort of thing. So these short-term incentives are there. So big tick in tailwinds behind those. That's an upward trend. Okay.
Got it.
When we look at our population growth, international migration, we've touched on this before, massive influx of people coming from there, no pun intended with the name. And so that's a giant tailwind behind us from that. If we look at, the next one being supply and demand, we had a massive window of, a false recession with COVID where no development approvals were happening. And that basically, so what they're talking about, properties dropping 20 and 30%, so nobody was doing any development approvals.
Yeah, those scary times.
Correct. And then they immediately did the government incentive for the building bonus, which then consumed all of the surplus stock. So there's a massive, massive, massive undersupply of stock in the pipeline and also under construction at the moment. So the supply and demand, we've got no supply, we've got huge demand from the population side. So there's a mismatch actually happening there at the moment. Then we look at the last one, purchasing power. We've had interest rates high for a long time because of inflation. Inflation's starting to come back under control, and it's imminent that we're going to have some interest rate drops, which then starts to make affordability start to come back into practice. And at that point, there's a whole bunch of people that actually want to leave the rental market and start to buy. But when they do, that mismatch of supply and demand is going to create a whole bunch of competitive tension on the property market.
So this is what you're predicting. You're predicting like some serious growth ahead.
Yeah. The thing that most people don't realize is by combining all of these together is how we're actually going to start to see where the next boom is actually going to happen. And it's just around the corner. We are at the precipice of this going to the moon.
Mate, I know we've already gone way over time, but I know this is going to be an episode that is going to help a lot of people get some clarity around, I suppose it's indecision sometimes, especially when right now we're living at a time where there's so many areas thrown around and it's easy to get conflicting information. If you can start trusting the data and following a process like this, it's a little bit of effort to put together, but it's going to give you something that has a little bit more of a solid feel to it to go, yeah, I reckon this is the path I should be walking down. And just recapping there, we're looking at government incentives at number 1, population growth for number 2, supply and demand for number 3, and number 4, we're talking about purchasing power. Obviously, there's all the different levels inside that as well. But otherwise, Rob Flux from Property Developer Network, thank you so much for jumping on the show and sharing this, mate. I know this is going to help a lot of people.
All good. Thanks, mate.